And our guest today is Joseph Sobran. He's the former senior editor of National Review. He now writes columns for the Griffin Internet Syndicate, his own monthly newsletter, Sobran's, and the Catholic weekly, The Wanderer. He's the author of the books Single Issues, Essays on the Crucial Social Questions, Anything Called a Program is Unconstitutional, Confessions of a Reactionary Utopian, Alias Shakespeare, Solving the Greatest Literary Mystery of All Time, and Hustler, The Clinton Legacy. You can read what he writes at Sobran.com. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Nice to be here.
Well, it's very nice to have you on. I was reading through some of your old articles recently, and I noticed that you've written that the American people have been lied into every war since the invasion of Mexico in 1846. How do you back that up?
Well, James Polk said the Mexicans had attacked U.S. forces, which is very doubtful. And when the young Congressman Abraham Lincoln, called him on it, demanded to know the precise spot where it had happened, where this alleged attack had happened, Polk simply ignored him. Lincoln was nicknamed Spotty Lincoln and lost, he couldn't even run again for his congressional seat. Well, Lincoln unfortunately learned the wrong lesson from that. He learned that a president in wartime can get away with nearly everything. So he threw the Constitution out pretty much when the South tried to secede. And his reasoning on why no state could secede was pretty feeble. And so it has gone, all the way to, I can't give you details for the Spanish-American War, but I suspect it was pretty much the same as were World Wars I and II.
Yeah, we do seem to have, as you pointed out in the article that I'm referring to, it's always forced on us, supposedly, by some dubious event, the sinking of the Lusitania,
the Maine,
Pearl Harbor, the battleship Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin battle, supposedly. There's always this event that, quote unquote, forces the war upon America.
Right, yeah, and everybody gets hot-headed, and we've got to defend the country. We're told that our freedom is in danger. Lincoln said that if the South seceded, freedom would perish from the earth. From the earth! My gosh. I mean, people don't, even now, they don't go back and read these words with their cool judgment. They just take them at face value. It's terrible.
Yeah, and the suppression of the insurrection in the Philippines, I often think back about, I don't know a whole lot about that, but I know that the Spanish finally didn't own the Philippines anymore, and they thought, yay, we're free, and then they looked at the horizon and saw a battleship with the red, white, and blue on it.
Right.
And, here we go all over again.
Yeah. That's tragic.
Yeah, they needed uplifting and Christianizing, right?
As somebody said, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history.
Oh, and then we just repeat it all over again.
Right.
Well, I don't really want to ask this next question until we get back from the break, which, we don't really have time. But when we come back, I'm going to ask you, how do you ever follow in with the National Review crowd? It's Joe Sobran on the Weekend Interview. He's the former editor of National Review, and that's kind of puzzling because when I read your articles, it seems like you're a pretty rational guy. I wonder how you could have ever fallen in with William F. Buckley and all those sick warmongers over at National Review.
Well, you have to remember, back in the 60s, the conservative movement was still taking shape, and National Review's conservatism and Bill Buckley's seemed like a very attractive alternative to the kind of liberalism we were groaning under. He was anti-liberal, anti-communist, and besides that, a very smart and charming man. Wonderful guy. I mean, I'm still fond of the memory, though not of his ideas. So I hooked up there and started writing for him in 72. I was only a senior editor, not the editor. That was always Bill's position.
I see.
But by about 1990, I was very uneasy because it seemed to me that National Review was not really devoted to sound conservative principles, that it was always supporting any war the U.S. got into, and I wondered if there was such thing as a war it wouldn't support. So, you know, talk about big government. I mean, the kind of military budgets we were supporting and demanding were, you know, far, far bigger than necessary for any defense, especially after the Soviet Union collapsed.
I was going to say, I noticed you're saying 1991, 92, that's the time when the big excuse for conservative big government kind of came to an end. And I've noticed, seems like many of the paleo-conservatives, like Pat Buchanan and so forth, kind of supported the Cold War, but then when the Soviet Union was gone and NATO wasn't, they kind of said, hey, you know, the promise was that all this big government was just temporary until the Soviet Union was gone.
Right.
And now here we're left with this giant Leviathan.
Right.
Is that basically what happened to you with the first Gulf War?
Exactly what happened. I wondered, you know, why on earth were we invading Panama, for example? What threat did Panama pose to the U.S.? I just couldn't see it. And then came the first Gulf War, and I said, well, here it is. These guys are going to cheer on any war the U.S. gets into. You know, I always say conservatives don't mind big government as long as it's shooting someone.
Right. Well, so when you look back on the Cold War years now, do you feel like, you know, kind of too bad you weren't just a libertarian all along?
Yeah.
And that the Cold War was kind of phony as well?
Yes. And, oh dear. I mean, when I think back on Vietnam, I really wish I'd joined the anti-war movement, although that tended to be too left-wing for me. You know, they just wanted a different kind of big government. So I stuck with my crowd, but I really am sorry I ran with a pack like that as long as I did. I didn't even entertain the possibility of, you know, other positions, libertarian, anarchist, whatever, something other than this, you know, kind of patriotism run amok. Not patriotic.
At what point did you start reading Rothbard?
Late 80s, I'd say. I'd always found him kind of shocking. And he is, in a healthy way. He rethought everything from the ground floor. He was a marvelous man and a great thinker, too.
I noticed in reading one of your articles about anarchy that you and I actually share the same story of how we got pushed from constitutionalist to anarchist, and that is Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Yep.
And I guess go ahead and tell your story, and I can pretty much just say ditto for me. That's what happened to me.
Well, in Hans Hoppe, Murray Rothbard got the disciple he deserved, and he, too, has had a great impact on the way I look at things in general. Now, he pointed out that in the 19th century, Russia, the U.S., Germany, and Italy were all consolidating into big, powerful states. And World War I followed. It's just one of those simple, large patterns you have to train yourself to notice. And Hans made me notice that one. Government has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And conservatism has abetted this, so-called conservatism. It squeaks a little bit about limited government, but when the chips are down, most conservatives have supported the growth of the state.
It seems like the real breaking point is when you realize Hoppe's assertion just seems so obvious that really there's no such thing as a limited republic. That if you create a constitutional government, it basically becomes an unlimited democracy or an unlimited state of some description, constitution or not.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson explained exactly why. He said, if the federal government is allowed to be the sole final interpreter of the Constitution, you might as well throw it out, because the government will always interpret the Constitution in a way that enlarges its own powers. And that's exactly what we've seen over the centuries now. I mean, it's time to learn.
Mr. Sobran, I've noticed that quite a few of the paleo-conservatives and paleo-libertarians, at least among the leadership, seem to be Catholics. You, Pat Buchanan, Lou Rockwell, and I wonder, is there a causation to that correlation?
I've often wondered that, but, you know, a lot of us are Jews and some Protestants and some atheists. You know, you just don't know, but it varies from case to case. But I've noticed a surprising number of Catholics becoming anarchists and libertarians lately, which gratifies me as a Catholic.
Well, it's very refreshing for someone for myself. I've never really been left or right. I've always kind of been a libertarian ever since I thought about these sorts of things. And so it's really nice to see a movement of, even if it has to change the name from conservatism to paleo-conservatism, but to see an anti-war right wing, I think is very important when, as you said before, the anti-war movement, if you look at it, it's a bunch of white kids with dreadlocks sitting blocking traffic when people are trying to get home from work, and nobody has any sympathy for them. But Joseph Sobran is the former senior editor of National Review, and, you know, we're going to have to at least take out a minute to understand why you're against all these wars.
Well, you know, war is killing people. I mean, I can't imagine Christ being a bomber pilot. You know, in fact, he never exhorts anyone to take any kind of political action. Anything. He suggests that the state is a dubious enterprise. When he says, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, he doesn't tell you what things those are or if there are things that belong to Caesar, does he?
No.
Leave that to you.
That's right. And, you know, the way I've always learned that, and I'm not a particularly religious guy myself, but the way I've always learned that story is the real lesson there is that none of this matters. This is just your test to see whether you get eternity or not.
Right.
And so if Caesar wants something from you, who cares? Go ahead and give it to him, because that's not what matters anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a lot different interpretation than, see, here Jesus says pay your taxes.
Right.
And show up at the conscription office when they ask you to.
Right. Well, you know, he didn't condemn those who worked for the state. He was, you know, charitable to the Roman centurion. He said he hadn't seen such faith in all Israel. So, you know, he doesn't always give us a direct teaching on these subjects. But, you know, nobody can claim him that way. So we have to just kind of keep listening, I think.
What do you make of these Christian Zionists who seem to be more pro-Israel than any American Jews?
Yeah, I know it. That's a problem, isn't it?
I'm not really sure what their motivation is.
Well, I take them at their word. They really believe that God gave that land to the Jews forever. But why that should implicate the U.S. government is another matter.
Oh, you're not supposed to think about that, though. You're just supposed to go from step 1 to step 3.
Yeah, right. So, seems to me, well, for one thing, there's the obvious indifference to the fate of Arab Christians, for example. What about them? Do they have any rights, even if they've lived there for centuries?
Well, it seems like there's been negative consequences for the Christians that live in Iraq right now.
Yeah, sure.
I've read
how
stories.
many...
Oh, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Well, just please call me Joe. And anyway, how many Iraqi deaths is an acceptable number to achieve whatever goal it is we're trying to achieve? They don't talk about that. I mean,